Well, hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to, well, it was supposed to be the Joe and Joe Weather Show until a few minutes ago when Joe messaged me and told me that he wasn't feeling too well. He said he might call in during the show or possibly not at all. So maybe he needs to take a day off with the winter weather that we have and all the diseases that are running around, flu, colds, and everything else. So, welcome tonight. We've got a lot of weather to talk about, and I will attempt to monitor the chat as best I can. Since Joe is not going to be here, I could put you on the second screen, and we'll get started on what is proving to be a rather interesting winter storm that is impacting much of the northern plains, upper Midwest, and then across the uh, Great Lakes, northern Ohio Valley, and then here we go into the Northeast tomorrow. So let's get to it right off the bat. Uh, Want to start off with the watches and warnings tonight because we do have quite a bit of them, and we've got blizzard warnings up in the northern plains in northeastern North and eastern South Dakota, parts of southwestern Minnesota, northwestern Iowa. Winter storm warnings for just about the entire state of Iowa and the rest of Minnesota, northwest Wisconsin. Also have a small winter storm warning area up in southeastern Michigan, in and around the Detroit area. Winter weather advisories, very large area of those running from Missouri northeastward through Illinois, Indiana, the northern half of Indiana, most of Ohio except the southern third, all of Pennsylvania except the extreme southeast, the mountains of northwest Virginia, eastern West Virginia, Maryland, except the eastern shore, and then cutting across the northern half of New Jersey, New York City, Long Island, Connecticut, northwest Connecticut through parts of upstate New York, I-90 northward into the Adirondacks. We have winter storm warnings up and winter storm warnings up also for parts of western Massachusetts, with advisories extending north from there into Vermont, New Hampshire, and through part of Maine. Steve LaPont, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Zim is on tonight. Please discuss the H and whether it looks to hang the high and whether it looks to hang on longer or not. Well, it's not going to hang it's not going to hang on longer in a meaningful way. It is going to hang on enough where the cold air is going to be a bit tough to dislodge. One of the things that happened today is that temperatures didn't get out of the 20s in my area, and some places didn't even make it above the low and mid 20s. So that's a pretty significant accomplishment. It just shows you how cold this air really is, the density of this cold air mass, and skies for now are clear. Two things of note on the U.S. satellite loop tonight. I'll pull up a full disk. I want to show you the storm that is southeast of Newfoundland because it truly is a powerhouse. And we have all this Gulf moisture just streaming northward, this subtropical moisture over Mexico and the western Gulf, moving northeastward on up into the Great Lakes. A lot of precip here being generated, and that cloud cover, some of the high clouds now starting to move over into eastern Pennsylvania and points west. I think the lead clouds are going to thin out a bit because if you look to the east, you've got the streaming clouds off the warm ocean. You just love how this visible picks up the outline of the coast, the colder air coming off of it, and then you get those ocean low clouds that develop and sweep out to the east. The actual storm center is well offshore. On the upper left, I'll shift the picture over, and you can actually see the animal that's out in the Gulf of Alaska there. There's a pretty strong system that is moving inland, soon to move inland into the western part of the United States, and that's going to it's part of the equation with respect to how the long range is going to evolve. But first things first, of course, is uh, is this particular system, and we'll go to the full disk. I want to just give you a view here. We've got it was so impressive looking earlier today, and it's every bit as impressive looking now. I'll add a few frames to this loop. And I mean, look at that animal that is sitting just southeast of Newfoundland, is probably seeing certainly gales from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland, and probably some hurricane force wind gusts occurring near the coastal areas. And you can see the parade that's to the west, the system crossing moving into the Great Lakes now and heading into the Northeast. And it's a little hard to see. I'll try to get a full disc. Let's see if we can get a full disc shot of the west, because I think that would be pretty interesting to take a look at. And let's try that. I mean, look at that. That's really very impressive there, sitting off the coast northwest of Washington and in Canada from west of Vancouver. That big, gigantic Pacific animal that is moving toward the northeast, and then there's yet another one right behind that. So Pacific remains actually very busy and rather accommodative if we can straighten out from the standpoint of what's going on in the jet stream across the U.S. You might have some interesting things to talk about down the road. So we'll get to that when we get into the long range. The radar this evening is actually pretty impressive in terms of the coverage, and this is the element that I'm going to be looking at for tomorrow. One of the things that I pointed out this afternoon on a few of my posts was the fact that the Weather Service, when they updated their forecast late today, they expanded the winter weather advisories, which I kind of expected because when they put some of the offices put them up last night in anticipation. Others waited till late today. Then we had a few areas getting expanded here and there. But snow amounts were actually nudged higher by a few offices. And I decided that I'm just going to leave my particular numbers alone because I want to see what the radar is going to look like tomorrow morning when that precip is into western Pennsylvania, because that I think is going to be key in terms of whether some areas wind up with only an inch or two, or if some areas wind up with 3, 4, or 5 inches. So we'll see. Meanwhile, with all this bitter cold air, Chuck Cardillo, you're down to 2 above zero right now, and I'm guessing you're going to go below zero before too long. And that is part of that very cold air. This air mass that came down from Canada was not fooling around with as far as the cold temperatures are concerned. Allison Garrett, Joe Rayo informed me just before we went on the air tonight that he wasn't feeling too well, so that he was either going to call in late or possibly just miss the show completely. So we'll see. I've got the Skype line open um, just in case. So pretty impressive here. You see also that little swirl that's back up through South and North Dakota. So that's where you have your blizzard warnings up, where you got the upper support with the system that is moving along to the east. Look at the satellite. I'm sorry. Look at the surface map. The storm center is now off the easternmost part of this chart, and we have the isobar that's visible. Looks like it's a 964 low. That's east southeast of St. John's, Newfoundland. And the gradient has been extremely tight, and in fact, the winds have been rather strong and gusty out my way all day long. But finally, that high is beginning to build in. That large 1044 high that's up to the north. Temperatures in southeastern Canada today either didn't make it out of the single digits, or in some cases even further north, at least as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, and they're not going up, obviously. We're down below zero, while in my neighborhood, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, it was in the mid 20s to around 30. Did manage to get up into the upper 30s to around 40, though, when you head down into southern Virginia and into the 40s and North Carolina. So the core of the cold air is kind of hugging to the north, which is what you normally see in situations like this. It certainly cooled off all the way down the coastline because of that offshore storm, but the real cold push, the coldest air, didn't make it much further south. Washington, D.C. at 4 o'clock this afternoon on the Ob was 38, while New York City was 29. So a big difference for only a couple of hundred miles in a situation like this. And your low is now back 1,002 low. You see it here in southwestern South Dakota. You've got a lot of southerly isobars ahead of it. Temperatures, St. Louis is 31. Looks like the freezing line is somewhere across southern Missouri and then cutting across northern Kansas and back up through Nebraska. So the warmer air trying to come on the backside of this is having a bit of a tough time because of the density of the Arctic air that has come on down. So let's go and take a look at what the Weather Service is doing with regards to snow amounts. And as I said from earlier today, they've kind of raised the amounts along areas across southern Connecticut back to New York City to, well, not quite to about Philadelphia. Upton was, fairly aggressive, I think, in terms of their numbers. 3 to 4 across Long Island, and 4 to 6 for the Hudson Valley in northern New Jersey. I have about half that. I did not change my forecast, by the way, from yesterday, and I will explain why in a moment in detail. But here you got the snow forecast up through Sunday morning into northern Maine. You're looking at 3 to 6 inch amounts in northern Maine. You're looking at 4 to 8 throughout much of upstate New York, where we have the winter storm warnings up, mainly north and east of I-90. You're seeing 4 to about 8 inches, covering a fairly large area from the Adirondacks eastward. And then, of course, the amounts drop off as you go further south, 4 to 6 across Connecticut, 4 inch amounts in the middle Hudson Valley down to about Route 84. Actually, the Upton's got it down further south than that. And across Pennsylvania, it's mostly about 2 inches across the southern part of the state and about 5 to 6 inches as you go from north central to northwestern Pennsylvania. A little bit lower in northeastern Pennsylvania, closer to 4 than anything else. And then through the Midwest, of course, it doesn't count what's already fallen, but we're seeing some aggressive snow mounts here too, in and around the Great Lakes on the order of 6 to 10 inches, and where there's probably going to be some lake effect happening up off the shores of Lake Superior. You can see the plumes that pop up here, amounts in the range of about 10 to 15 inches. We don't want to forget the folks up in the Pacific Northwest, because we do have winter storm warnings up for that parts of that area still, with elevated areas in the eastern part of the state still getting hit pretty hard with some rather big snows. So the situation is like this with regards to tomorrow. So here we have the GFS, which is going to show you everything in 6 hour increments. So we're not going to be able to see what's in between. And the GFS is showing this radar for 7 o'clock this evening. And if we go back and take a look at that radar shot again, this is what it looks like. And a little bit of a close-up view. There's a lot of precip there surging up toward Chicago and Milwaukee right now, and points northward. Some heavier precip looks like in the form of rain as you go further to the south. But the general radar presentation and that we see and what the GFS is showing matches up fairly well. And I guess if we pull up the NAM in a moment, we'll see how that looks. But I'm thinking it probably looks okay too. And there's your high that moves up north of the St. Lawrence River by tomorrow morning, northwest of northernmost Maine. And now you're going to start to see precip break out on radars aloft tomorrow morning. We'll probably see them, some aloft echoes north of New York City northwest. This first band, and it stands out here. This is one of the things that is concerning me with regards to the snow amounts being lifted up too high. You have this first band that pops out on the radar that kind of runs out ahead, right in here. And then there's a gap, and then you have this second area of precip that's behind it. So my question here is, well, for the first question to me is whether that first band holds together. It's relatively narrow, and out of that, maybe it snows for an hour or two. Does the gap in between happen? And you get these things tend to happen when you have a lot of warm air advecting northeastward, and sometimes you get precip that sort of tries to break out ahead of it, where the main support and the main low still staying back here as we see it here in northwestern Illinois tomorrow morning. Looks like the surface low may have actually tracked a little bit further south. That might be another reason why the cold air is hanging on just a little bit longer. The low still winds up going over Lake Michigan, and this is at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. You have this warm front that's up out to the south. But again, because of the fact that the nature of the air is so cold, this polar, it's not quite an Arctic air mass, but it's certainly a very cold polar air. You've got one high that's off the Carolinas. There's still something left of a high up near the St. Lawrence River. So that is holding things up. Also, one of the other things that's happening is if you look at the isobars here, they're predominantly southwest in orientation. They're not causing a flooding southeast wind to come in off the ocean. Otherwise, it would warm up very, very quickly. The winds at the boundary level of the atmosphere above the surface to a few thousand feet are about coming out of the south 180 degrees, 190 degrees. That, while a warmer wind, is not as warm as, say, a southeast wind. So that probably is another reason why the coastal areas might just barely hang on for a little while longer. And then by tomorrow night, again, we can't see what goes on in between. If you notice, that gap on the GFS does close to an extent as the snow arrives tomorrow afternoon. And then by tomorrow evening, we're seeing the GFS bringing a change to rain to most, but not all, of Long Island and back down in central Jersey, but it still stays mostly snow up to the north. And of course, it's snowing upstate New York and on up through New England. And then by the time we get to 1 o'clock in the morning, it's all said and done. So we're really talking here about a 6-hour event of snow and then maybe another 2 hours of 2 or 3 hours of rain behind it. And that's it. And then weather conditions will improve on Sunday. The NAM shows it a bit better in terms of this this split that I'm talking about in the radar echoes. So we'll bring the NAM. Well, you know what? Let's do the 3 kilometer because that shows it even better. But you see here tomorrow morning, you've got this arc that runs from northwest PA down into northern Virginia, then a gap, and then you've got all this other precip that's back through Ohio and Indiana. That gap needs to fill. It's trying to fill here at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. That lead arm is in northern New Jersey to about New York City and northeastern Pennsylvania. The second area is marching along, and you get that first push. There's some holes there on the radar at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Then it fills in again. So my question is, how fast does it fill in? Because you know what? If it doesn't fill in fast enough, I think that really cuts down on the amount of precip. So when it came down to it, as I was making a decision today with respect to my snow forecast, this is, I'm going to bring it up on the screen here. Just give me a moment to find it. And hopefully this will work. Hang on. I know it's in black at the moment. Let's see if it'll pick it up this way. No, it doesn't. I got to do it a different way. Okay, so hang on 1 second. Let's go back to the GFS look. There we go. And I'm going to try doing it differently here. So I will bring up my website because I know I posted the map there and I can bring it up full screen. And you'll see that it pretty much is the same from yesterday. There we go. So here's what it looks like. I have a 2-inch line. I'm sorry, a 1-inch line across southern areas of New York City, the southern half of Long Island, less than an inch, 1 to 2 inches further north, and the 2-inch line going across New York City, and then kind of bending back westward when you get into southeastern PA and pushing to Lancaster and between Chambersburg and Harrisburg, and you've got this area of 4 inches plus for Northeast PA, 3 to 4 up the Hudson Valley, 2 to 3 in the southern areas of the Hudson Valley. And I'm tomorrow morning when I look at the radar, if I see signs that that area is filling in and filling in fast enough, then I may just double these numbers to come better into line with what the Weather Service is doing. So here's for example, this is what Upton did for the New York City area. 3 to 4 across western and central Long Island, 2 to 3 as you go further east, 1 or 2 at Montauk, 3 to 4 coastal Connecticut back to New York City, and then you've got an area of 4 to 6 inches northeastern New Jersey on up into southern New England. I honestly think that the numbers are too high. Uh, that's my never to be humble opinion. I think you could make arguments. You certainly could make an argument to go for an upside. I just was not ready to accept it because, well, for the reasons I stated, and plus the fact that, listen, if this were a winter where we were getting snow on a regular basis, I probably wouldn't have. I wouldn't hesitate to go for some higher numbers. But I'm just a bit hesitant here. One man's opinion. Yes, never be humble opinion, sir. Thank you so much for hitting super chat tonight. I truly appreciate it. Thank you. Here's Mount Holly's view, and basically 2 to 4 inches from central New Jersey north up into northwest New Jersey. I think this is a fair representation in terms of what you can expect. 2 at Trenton, 1 at Philadelphia, 1 at Coatesville, 3 in Reading, Mount Pocono at 4. And if I go back to, we'll pull up State College, CTP, and you'll see um, they have amounts of 5 and 6 inches up in north central PA up near Bradford and going west. We're seeing 4 to 6 throughout much of north central PA, Williamsport 4, Wellsboro 3, State College 4, and then you start to get into these lower amounts. They're going 2 for Lancaster, York, Gettysburg, Chambersburg, Bedford, Harrisburg, and Lebanon at 3, Pottsville at 4. I guess this isn't an unfair representation of what to expect. And I think I'll go down. Let's see if I can get LWX if that'll work. And so here's the view for Zim. This is for you, Washington D.C., Baltimore, less than an inch in Washington, but more north and west. Baltimore 1 to 2, Westminster 2 to 3, Hagerstown 1 to 2, Cumberland 2 to 3 up in western Maryland, and you're seeing generally less than an inch as you go down, go west on 66 and down 81 toward Harrisonburg and and Staunton, and then it just kind of cuts off from there. So uh, their numbers seem to be pretty reasonable to me. Albany, we'll take a look at what they're doing, and we're seeing up in Albany. We've got pretty hefty amounts north of I-90. Saratoga Springs 8, Glens Falls 8, Old Forge 9, Gloversville 8. You go south of 90, and it's basically 4 to 6, 5 in Poughkeepsie, 4 in Hunter, Westerlo 4, Chatham 5, Albany 4. I think this is pretty fair. And you can see the amounts in southern Vermont, 6 to as much as 10 inches, and 6 or 7 to 8 inches in western Massachusetts and down into northwestern Connecticut in Litchfield County. So again, these all look good to me. It's that area around Upton covering my area that I just think they went a little bit too high. Tomorrow we'll know who's closer to being correct or not. Here's Boston's view for the rest of Massachusetts: 4 in Boston, 5 in Worcester, 3 to 5, 3 to 6 across Connecticut, 2 inches along the coastal areas, 2 inches out in the Cape at Provincetown, Chatham, and Hyannis. So this pretty well covers, this first particular event as it moves along. I want to take a look at the long range tonight a little bit. The Lord Kate, who is occasionally on these live streams, sent me a question on Patreon, which I thought was a really good question. What is it going to take to uh, to create a situation where you could see a snowfall up the urban corridor up 190 up I-95, and I think there are two things that need to happen. One of the things that we've been dealing with is this sort of this west to east flow across the United States. It's been like this for a good part of this month, where we've seen this rather fast flow across the U.S. and there hasn't been much to suppress these systems further south. They've been taking tracks further north in this west to east flow. We warm up ahead of it. The cold air has no way to hold on. There hasn't been much in the way of any real blocking, and and we've seen the outcome of that. And of course, it doesn't help that you had this deep trough that's out in the west. This is the upper air on the European going back to Wednesday night, by the way. So we've since seen some changes here as that western trough continues to weaken. And now, of course, going into today, we have a little bit of ridging in the east, not a particularly strong ridge, but the trough in the west is all but gone. And now that's being replaced by a ridge. And you see our upper air energy with our weather system for tomorrow that is heading to the east. Well, in the meantime, out in the Atlantic, you've got this big storm. This was a storm that moved off the New England coast yesterday and intensified very rapidly. This is problem number one. Problem number one has been the Atlantic. It has been, and here is a good shot of the jet stream from back on Tuesday night. It's been a fire hose across the Atlantic. This fast flow goes all the way across. The Pacific isn't a fire hose, but the Atlantic is. There's no traffic out there. There are no weather systems out off the coastal waters. Cranky Weather Guy likes to refer to the traffic out in the Atlantic. And what we basically need are some storms out here to create some sort of a log jam in weather systems coming eastward so they can not only slow down, but possibly be forced to track a bit further to the south than what they've been tracking. So the first thing that needs to that needs to change is the situation that's out of the upper air out in the Atlantic, and we're going to see that in the coming days. We're starting to see, we see this weather system, this big storm that's near Newfoundland, and that runs up to between just off the coast of Greenland, between in Baffin Bay. And then you have the another storm on Monday that forms out in the Atlantic south of the Azores. You also have this trough left over from the trough that's coming through in the upper air Sunday and Monday that's dropping into the southeast. That is going to make a system out in the Atlantic, and you can see it here. So now all of a sudden we don't have that fire hose so much anymore. We've got a little traffic out here. We've got this system. We've got one that's out east of the Azores. And now, of course, you've got this next trough that's coming eastward. Got a bit of a flow coming out of Canada. Pressures are high, trying to go higher than normal in the North Atlantic, which is going to drive the NAO negative, and that is a positive sign for systems that are going to want to track further south. And at least from the standpoint of the European is recognizing this, because if you notice here, by late Friday of next week, you have this system in the south that is not combining with any kind of energy up in the north. It's just sort of moving along on its own in the flow and off the coast by the time we get to the 26th and 27th, next Sunday and Monday. So the European seems to have the idea that there will be enough of a change here to force these systems to track further to the south. And what's very interesting to me is when you look at this in terms of the scope of the entire area from the Atlantic to the Pacific, you've got this, you've got this, you've got this, you have this. Okay, so there appears to be a train of systems that wants to move along here. If we can keep uh, conditions up in this area. Now you're getting some cold air that's coming down from the Arctic regions into Canada in a setup like this up in northern Canada. So if we can keep this jet stream suppressed further south than normal, the way the European has it, and have enough, at least close enough access so that some of this cold air that's up to the north in Canada can bleed southward, much like we had this high come down. If we can have something like that happen along the way, that may open the door for some possibilities regarding the longer range. And what the models are having trouble with, of course, is we are seeing some changes in those teleconnections. Remember when we had the off the wall negative Pacific North America index? Well, guess what? After today, we're going positive and we're going rapidly higher to a very, very, not quite what I would describe as off the wall, but very strong positive PNA index throughout the next uh, 12 or 13 days starting from the 19th, assuming that tonight's snapshot would be the same. This is a very, very strong PNA index. So the Pacific North America index is saying very strong ridge in the west, troughing in the east, and also impacting on the other areas of geography, um, all playing into this strong PNA. You'll notice that the NAO goes negative. It doesn't go strongly negative. It goes somewhat negative. It's not a weak negative number, but minus 100 is not too bad. So you go negative and you stay negative pretty much for the next. Well, we're neutral now. There's a little positive jump here on the 20th. I'm not sure why, and then it goes negative to minus 100. So we get a steep drop here, and that's that trough in the east swinging through, and then you stay negative pretty much through the end of the month. And that's where I think your cold air source is coming from. We thought days ago the EPO was going to be helpful, and while it's not hurting too bad, it's not really being helpful here. It actually goes slightly positive, somewhat positive here with the plus 100s. It gets back down closer to zero for a few days next weekend. So it would be nice if we could get the East Pacific Oscillation to at least get back down to the neutral line. But if not, then we're going to have to depend on that NAO getting negative enough in the longer term. The GFS plays out a little differently than the European does. Take a look at it. I'm going to look at it for the first time for late this afternoon. It just kind of looks like a mess whenever the pattern gets at least a little bit blocky, you start to see the upper air kind of look a bit messy. And that's sort of what you have here. Of course, it plays out the same for the early part of the week. It does imply some of the traffic in the Atlantic, but probably not nearly as aggressive as the European is. And here's what happens with the GFS. It's got this. You've got that same kind of train here that I described earlier, except that uh, there seems to be some room for this to try to lift up to the northeast toward the lakes, or at least that's what the GFS wants to imply. Whether it's right or not remains to be seen, but you see how it makes the swing around. And I think the reason it's doing that is because if you look at the northern part of the jet here in Canada, there's a short wave that is running eastward across Hudson Bay down to northern Minnesota. And I think what the GFS is doing is it's trying to not so much phase with it, but at least get involved with this system enough that it pulls it up to the northeast and tracks it to our west. I don't know that that's correct. We'll have to see because if you notice on the GFS, that shortwave never really phases with it. It's just at one point it gets strong enough where it kind of pulls it up. If it misses it, like the European implies, then you're going to find that kind of running along more easterly rather than northeasterly, and I think that would open the door with the kind of setup that the European has, and that will pose some questions for late next weekend and going into Monday, January 27th. And in the longer haul, if you look at the GFS upper air, the jet is still pretty well suppressed to the south. and actually doesn't look half bad here toward the end of the forecast period in the first days of February. You do have a bit of a cold air connection with the flow, and higher than normal pressures building up in northeastern Canada. So, I mean, it's not the best upper air in the world, but it certainly isn't anywhere close to the worst, which is what we had going into last weekend and this week. So very quickly, let me run through what the GFS surface map did with this, how it handles all of this for next week, and we'll back up a bit. We'll use the I'll use the radar view. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to use the regular view, so because this way we can see how cold the air is or isn't, and I'll roll it back. The problem too is the fact that you don't have, the polar vortex is kind of separated from all of us right now. So that really truly brutal Arctic air is not really having success making it into northern Canada. You get some of it is bleeding down, and there is quite a bit of it in Canada that's bleeding down. But the real bitter air is sort of cut off, and there's your low for Saturday night and into Saturday into Saturday night. You've got this next big high coming down, so no doubt that it's going to be cold for at least the first half of the week. And again, because the GFS takes this next surface low, tries to take it up toward the lakes, you're getting the high to go out off of New Jersey, and then you just wind up basically with a simple cold front if that's the case. I don't necessarily agree with this idea. I don't know if the European is right, but I certainly can see what the differences are in the two models, and I just wonder whether the GFS is missing the boat here. First off, by the way, with the system for Monday night and Tuesday, that's well off the southeast coast. Remember, that's part of that Atlantic traffic that we want to see. And you've got that a low developing between the Bahamas and Bermuda here Tuesday into Wednesday, while high pressure sits right over Pennsylvania. So at least our weather will be quiet. And notice that the next high is up in west of James Bay on the European. It builds over, it kind of merges the two highs together, and now your southern system's being reflected by a 1,008 low sitting near New Orleans on Friday that runs up into Kentucky with another center down in South Carolina, Georgia. There's a third center there in Western Virginia, and then suddenly you have a low in Eastern Virginia with a high up in Vermont. Now, how cold is that air? I don't know. I mean, we may just have marginal cold air here. We'll just have to see. And that's part of that's the other part of the equation that we meant that Lord Kate asked about earlier. The cold air that bleeds down from Canada. How much of that cold air is going to get to bleed down? You're going to need some of it to get down at least like this one did, coming into the Northeast and down into the Northern Mid Atlantic states and sort of lock in there to maybe create an event that impacts the urban corridor from Washington on northward. So, in summary, I will again, just to wrap up as far as tomorrow is concerned. Again, I want to see what the radars look like tomorrow morning, and if I see that they are looking impressive, I will make the needed changes in the forecast. If they are looking like the models are depicting, then I'm thinking those other numbers are going to have to come down. The liquid precip amounts. The GFS has about 4/10 of an inch of liquid coming into my neck of the woods before any changeover to rain, so that might be supportive of some of the higher numbers we're seeing. The NAM has sort of backed off a little bit, but it's been doing that. It's been sort of doing this nip and tuck thing. I'm looking at the one thing that worries me from the standpoint of my numbers being too low is the fact that the cold air seems to be more important, and that might be what makes the difference. You get a good shot of precip to come into this cold air that'll still be holding on here tomorrow afternoon, and you could put down a quick 2 or 3 inches if you generate a couple of tenths of liquid and you get maybe a 15-to-1 ratio while the air is still cold enough. Then the warm front's going to go by. We'll go above freezing tomorrow evening, and by that time, the bulk of the precip is pretty much over with. So I'm going to come up full screen here I guess Mr. Rayos decided that he's going to take the whole night off, which is fine. We can do that. So I'll just bring the chat board so where I can see it right in front of me here. Quincy McCoy, welcome aboard. You're new here. Nice to see you on board. At at first, next storm, I thought it would develop a storm off North Carolina near Wilmington to the Outer Banks for Tuesday. I don't know. That's too. I think that might be too far north and west, Quincy, because of where the trough is. If you look at the orientation of how the trough is oriented in a northeast southwest way, uh, and swinging around in that fashion, the low looks to me like it would be further southeast and far enough offshore where it won't produce any problems. Um, if the trough is a little deeper and maybe a little more of a neutral type tilt, you might wind up with something a bit closer to the coast. So for now, I'm going to just I'm just going to leave it there the way I have it. I'm just running back to see some of your thoughts here. Of course, Fyodor Letkovsky, the GFS always has a great look for snow at 384 hours. You would think that just from the standpoint, broken clocks are right twice a day. If you throw something uh, against a wall with just a slight amount of adhesive, and you throw it enough times, at some point you would think it would stick, and you would think at some point you would see one of these storms in the long range play out. I've always been of the opinion that it's better not to see them. I'd rather see something like we saw today, where you're kind of struggling with the upper air in terms of what is or isn't going to happen, and you have to sort of use your imagination to figure out, well, where is this going? How is this going to evolve? I think for me that works a whole lot better. Hey, Brandon Doherty, nice to see you on board tonight, and thanks for hitting super chat. Really appreciate it. Jimmy ZNJ, so it ends as rain in New York City? Yeah, I think so, for an hour or two at the end. I don't think it really makes a huge difference in terms of what you're going to get uh, as far as snow amounts are concerned. The rain comes just at the very end as the warm front goes by. So usually in cases like that, it's not like you go to rain and you rain for 6, 7, 8, 9 hours afterward. You're going to change over to rain about 6 or 7 o'clock, and then the rain's going to end at about 9 or 10. And even in terms of volume, it doesn't look especially heavy. The only place where it might wind up being a little on the heavier side may be along the coast of Long Island, where you're on the where the border of that rain snow line is. If it runs across Long Island Sound or just north of there might be a little bit of a steadier, heavier rain there. The total precip that most of the models are generating altogether is about a half to 3/4 of an inch. So if you figure if you could wind up getting about a half an inch, if you wind up with half an inch of that being as snow, if you're lucky, and then maybe a quarter of an inch or another 2/10 of an inch as rain, that would work out. Chris Kotner, hoping that it stays all snow in central PA. It's kind of tough. You do have some warm air that it's affecting eastward. It might try to go to sleet at some point, but you still might get a good solid thump of snow when that happens. And I know, Bill, a military clock is only wrong once a day. All right, so I'll give it a little bit of room with the standard old analog clock, and go twice a day. Ryan Ford, isn't the GFS usually the colder solution? This time around, it looks like the reverse. Yeah, the GFS has it. It's for the longest time the GFS was a warmer model than all the other ones, and then something happened when they did one of these upgrades. When they did the one last year, it was ridiculously cold. There was a real problem with how cold that model was, so they had to pull it when they were bringing out the new GFS, and they did a little fixing, and apparently whatever they did seems to be working so far. The GFS actually on these last couple of runs has been a shade colder, so we'll see if that means anything. The SREF plumes, by the way, which is a model that I like to look at for trends, have not been especially bullish in terms of the snow amounts, at least so far. Through today, only showing a 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 inch snowfall for most of the area. So I'm not really, I'm not enthused. I would like to see the plumes come in tonight and go up a little bit. And Chuck Cardillo, your shadow is watching me, your cat. Very nice. He likes my headphones. Yeah, you know what? It's a lot easier than those darn earbuds. Is the earbuds always kind of hurt me. Um, Adam Lowe, the models have the MJO, which is the Madden-Julian oscillation. For those of you who don't know, that's basically wind changes and oscillations that occur in the Indian Ocean and that come off of India and the Himalayas. That's a little more complicated than what I just said, but just trust me, that's good enough. The models have the MJO looping back into the warm phases in February. Okay, but I would just tell you, Adam, there's such an over reliance on these broad scale um, technical indicators, as I would call them. The MJO has to couple with everything else that's going on. You could have the MJO going into whatever phase it goes into. If it doesn't couple with the atmosphere and sort of create a chain of events going down the road across the Pacific and beyond, it might not matter. There was a point last year, as I recall, the you had the split in the polar vortex in the stratosphere that happened in, I believe, mid to late January. It never coupled with what was going on at the bottom of the atmosphere. The Pacific jet was in complete control and stayed in complete control for the rest of the winter. The MJO, I believe, at one point last February went into phases 8, 1, and 2, which are supposed cold phases. And maybe that was the time in early February where we had that one really solid Arctic shot. But after that, it didn't make a difference. So I'm not even, I spend, it's only maybe in the last 2 years that I even remotely began to at least pay attention to what somebody might say about it. But it's not part of my, um, I don't really look at it, mainly because my stuff. What I do is mostly 2 week focused. I stay in that 2 week time frame. I cannot deal. One of the things that's really driven me crazy lately on social media with weather posts. There's this over obsession with the long range. Every day it's, well, the MJO is this, and then of course there's the GFS is showing one thing on the MJO, and the European shows another. Then the next day it's something else, and the next day it's something else, and each one uh, is each one leads to a different set of outcomes as far as the weather across the United States. I'm at the point now where I don't even want to read about that stuff, and I don't even want to see it. I just want to enjoy myself in forecasting the weather that's actually there in the short and medium range. The long range can take care of itself, and then I can live in the long range when we get there. But in the meantime, what fun is forecasting weather in the wintertime if you're going to make conclusions about the whole season before it's even started? Or even if you're a quarter of the way through it, or halfway through it, or 3/4 of the way through it. I just like to watch the weather patterns evolve and just kind of take it from there. And that's where I'm leaving it. Adrian, you should mention the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, when Joe Rayo's around, because that's a big deal with him. He's a strong proponent of those decadal oscillations that occur. And Chris Cotner, while the euro isn't always right, in terms of the specific places that you're dealing with as a forecast tool, the euro probably has the same amount of issues as the other models have. When you look at it in terms of the broad scale, the European does perform better. When they do these verification tests, the European continues to come out ahead of the other models, which kind of makes sense. It's just that I wouldn't just necessarily sit on that and say, well, I'm not going to look at anything else. I'll just look at the European. I don't know that that's a wise thing to do. I think it's wise to not look at too many models. Let's put it that way. That I would certainly be a proponent of. Just want to see if the 0Z HRRR model is not in yet. So it doesn't go out far enough. It only takes us, the current one takes us to mid-noon tomorrow, where it has snow into western New Jersey, by the way, and eastern Pennsylvania. It still has that little gap there in between, trying to fill in, but the snow hasn't quite gotten there. The 0Z run would take us out to through the day, afternoon tomorrow into tomorrow evening, because the 0, 6, 12, and 18Z runs of the HRRR go out to 36 hours. We can look. Let me see what the I didn't even look and see what the RGEM did. Because this is one of those situations where the regional Canadian model might offer some assistance. So why don't we take a look at that as we're coming up on 7:50 Eastern Time tonight on the Joe Chaffee Weather Show, because Joe Rayo is not with us tonight. He is not feeling well. So this is at noon tomorrow. This is not radar, by the way. Just bear that in mind. This is precipitation rate that you're seeing here. So you want to look for the darker blue areas showing the heavier snow or rain. So here we are. You see that finger? I mean, it really looks like a finger with green nail polish out there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon that runs from northeastern PA down into northern New Jersey. This is what concerns me with respect to why I kept my amounts lower, because of the fact that it's got this little arm that goes through. Then you get the second push, and now we're at 6 o'clock in the evening. So what falls between? You get a shot here, a little break, and then the next shot. So this is at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and you're already seeing the RGEM has a little bit of rain there on the south shore of Long Island, and then it has an all rain on Long Island by 7 o'clock in the evening. So I don't know. It's how much precip are you going to get in that 3 or 4 hour time frame? That is the critical question here, and that's why, again, I kept my amounts low. Oddly enough, there seems to be at least an indication of how the model shows the snow area here, that it is trying to show some cold air sort of weakly wedging southward, and that's because you do have weak higher pressure up in northern Maine and back up into Canada that's hanging on. That's that maybe subtle change that the models have picked up on, and as a result, you wind up with maybe an extra hour or two in some places of frozen precipitation. And this is, by the way, at 10 o'clock at night. Now, the radar of this would look, everything would be shifted to the east, because this is showing precip from the hour before. So it's pretty much done. Ends between 7 and 10 o'clock from west to east, and then we turn colder as we go into Sunday and Monday. So at least that part of the equation is matching up to the others. And by the way, when you look at the Canadian model, going back to the long range view, don't mean to jump around, but it just occurred to me. But if we look at the Canadian model, it kind of gives you the idea of what the European did today. Uh, Not quite as far south as the European, but you see where the surface low is. Actually, fairly close. I mean, it bottoms out there in Texas and northern Louisiana, and then starts to move northeastward. You see the high up in Maine, kind of wedging southwestward into Pennsylvania, into the Appalachians. So with some adjustments here, and that high maybe in a slightly better position, the low maybe a little bit further south and east, get the cold air to be slightly more important, and then maybe you're talking about something happening next weekend. We'll see. It's a long way to go. There's a lot that has to play out. We've got, the system that, as I said, the system that is out to our east right now. That's part of the equation here. Of course, this system is a big part of the equation, as it really sort of gets the whole ball rolling as far as the what we're seeing with the upper air pattern for next week and beyond. So we're just going to have to sit back and watch. There are times where models don't really help you with regards to setting up the pattern going forward. We've got the players, we know what the puzzle pieces are, but we have to see how this all eventually just kind of plays out. Just a very messy, almost sausage making type process that we're seeing going on. Okay, so let's see. Jeffrey Mara, as we talk about hype, I just got an ABC News notification about 100 million people bracing for winter weather. I'll have to tell you this: our ancestors must be laughing hysterically, at all of this. And unfortunately, I try to keep a sense. Those of you who have been watching me, for the last couple of years, know that we keep a very even keel about things here. If you ever see us myself get worried or Joe Rayo get concerned, it would be really something to worry about. But the rest of the time, this is day to day weather, and I think what most of us that are here enjoy the fun, the education. We're fascinated by weather and how it evolves, and uh, that's what we're seeing. And we always try to communicate here in a very easy, even keeled type of way, and really try to avoid nonsense with regards to hyping. That's something that we never do here. Brandon Doherty, one more thing, Joe. I heard Joe Rayo would love to have your fans at a restaurant this summer. That would be a great idea. It would be like a summit. Well, that's, I guess, yeah. If everybody shows up, it could be. It'd be a very, very expensive bill. I think we'd all have to pick up each our own tabs here. But Joe brought it up yesterday. We'll probably, once we get a little bit, things get a little bit warmer. We'll figure it out. We'll see if we could manage to pull something like that off. The problem is locations for everybody. We're all in different places. I'm in Long Island. He's in the Hudson Valley. So we'd have to figure out some sort of middle ground for everybody to come. But who knows? We'll give it a whirl. Ryan Ford, do you think the blocky signature will result in cold air locking in? Well, that's what you're hoping for, Ryan. That's exactly what you're hoping for. You get a blocky signature, keeps cold air, or at least allows cold air to drain southward out of Canada into the Northeast, down to the Northern Mid Atlantic states, and then you get a flow in that fast west to east flow is suppressed a bit further south, so you could tap some of that cold air and get some snow to start out somewhere, say in Northern Virginia, perhaps, and run up into southern New England. Thank you, Bob Mason. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I after a week goes by of being on doing live streams every day plus everything else that I do, uh, yeah, it gets tough. So look, my voice is starting to go just a little bit. Let me just remind you, Jason Barry. Let me bring that up. You brought up about the library. I actually do have a library talk coming up in a couple of weeks, but it's in the daytime this time around. It's at the Sagem Library in Holbrook, New York. It's exit 61 on the LIE. It's going to be on Wednesday, February 4th at 2 p.m. Okay, so if you're free during the day in the middle of a Wednesday and you're on Long Island, come on out to Sachem Library at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, February 4th, and I'll bring it up again from time to time going forward. Rusalin 114. The Weather Service does on their 1814 have above average temperatures for Pennsylvania. I'm gonna kind of take a neutral stance on that for now because I think everybody's sort of having trouble trying to figure out how this whole upper air pattern is working itself through. Maybe it won't be above normal. Perhaps it might be. I think it may wind up being closer to normal, or maybe even a little bit below normal. That's my guess here at this point. But you know what? We're not going to know that until we see how the pattern evolves this week. That will give you the biggest clue about where the weather is going forward. Watch the development of the upper air across North America this coming week. And that might give you the signal of where the weather is going to be going for the next 4 or 5 weeks. That's my that's my never to be humble opinion. All right, so everybody have a great evening tonight at 7:59. If you haven't done so already, by the way, go to Google Play or go to the App Store and download the Meteorologist Joe Chaffee weather app. And that's what it's called, Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. So it's for free. Download it. I got all the snow forecast maps on there from Maine to Georgia. So anywhere you are on the East Coast, if there's a snowstorm going to be happening, you can use that app. You can also get your local forecast. It defaults to your own location. And you get my weather analysis as well. Again, that's on Google Play or on the App Store, the Meteorologist Joe Chaffee weather app, which is absolutely free. And you can also download the Angry Ben's weather app, the Angry Weatherman. He does my nycweathernow.com website, and that's free. It's on Google Play for Androids, not yet available, although hopefully one day soon we'll have it available for the iPhone. Okay, it's a Friday night, so I'm not sure what we're going to do tomorrow. I'm going to check with Joe. I normally like to take Saturdays off because live streaming every day is tough, and we've got the Sunday morning show now, so I do kind of need a day to take a back seat. On the other hand, we do have weather going on, so I'm just going to play it by ear tomorrow. If it looks like it's a good idea for me to jump on for a little while, maybe I'll do a live stream tomorrow afternoon. But I'm not guaranteeing anything. I want to see if Joe's around. If he's around at a certain time, I'll try to time it with him if he's feeling better. So feel better, Mr. Rayo. We missed you tonight. Thanks for being here tonight, everybody. Thank you, those of you who've hit Super Chat tonight. As always, most appreciated. It goes a long way to support what we're doing. We gets to keep the free apps free and occasionally buys me a cigar or two, and I'm a pretty happy camper if that's the case. Good night, everybody.